This year is the first in hopefully a long series of shiurim on the series Sidra B'Halacha on the Triennial Cycle. Sidra B'Halacha is a concept invented by my good friend Joshua Freeman, and the idea is that you take a Sidra from the Triennial Cycle and you find a halacha that is referred to in the Sidra, or is Noveya from the Sidra, or a sugya that hinges around a posuk in the Sidra, and you study a collection of sources on that topic. Hitherto it's been kind of an intermittent, occasional thing. From now on, we want to give the thing a boost, and we want to make it a kavua thing, and hopefully, therefore, it will be. So we're starting on this week's Sidra in the Triennial Cycle, or I should say our Triennial Cycle, because of course there are, in theory, limitless, equally valid Triennial Cycles, which is Bereishit 26, which corresponds to chapter 37 in the standard Christian-derived way of breaking up the Torah into parakim, which is the beginning of the Yosef story. Now, in this week's Sidra, there isn't really an obvious halachic hook, but there is a topic, a halachic topic, at least a topic with halachic aspects to it, which actually proves to be quite interesting. In fact, more interesting than I thought it would be when I originally chose a topic. So let's go. The pasuk we're going to start looking at, and I do advise, for those who haven't already, to open up the source sheet, which is in the Sefaria source sheet, which is in the description. So the pasuk we're going to start by looking at is pasuk Yud Beth, which says, "Vayelchu echal lir'oth eth son avihem b'Shechem," and his brothers, i.e. Yosef's brothers, went to shepherd the flock of their father in Shechem. Now, the point we're focusing on here is above the word eth, and this is one of 10 places where this is so in the Torah, we find 2 dots. Everyone's used in Chumash to seeing lots of dots and dashes and circles and things like that, and squiggles, which are the ta'amim, which some people use to aid their reading or to lane it, and some people just ignore. And everyone knows, of course, that they don't appear in the Torah. These dots have no musical function, certainly no known musical function, and they do appear in a Sefer Torah. Now, the dots here appear above the word eth. Briefly, before we move on, I'll just deal with what the word eth means in this context. So eth is a direct object, definite article marker. So if the pasuk was "Vayelchu echal liroth eth hason," and it didn't specify whose son, there would certainly have to be an eth. Since the pasuk is constructed as it is, actually, strictly speaking, the eth is optional. You could read the pasuk with and without the eth, and it would make sense. And there would be a slight difference in meaning. So, as I say, the eth marks a direct object, which is also a definite article. And therefore, the absence of eth in this case would mean that you had a direct object that wasn't a definite article. Now, because son avihem is in the construct form, a definite article would have to appear on the second word. And because the second word has a possessive suffix, i.e. avihem, not just stam av, their father, it can't take a definite article. So therefore, without the word eth, you would in fact you wouldn't know if it was a definite. Sorry, without the word, you could in this sentence have the word eth, or you could have it without eth, and both would make sense. Without eth would mean a flock of their father, and with eth means the flock of their father, and both of them are possible. Usually, if you don't have the eth, then it's a mistake, because it's obvious if you have the definite article. Here, since you can't mark the definite article in any other way, the sentence would read grammatically either way. But the difference between these two sentences is more or less a distinction without a difference. i.e., in a purely kind of from a narrative view, from a semantic view, does it really matter whether they went to shepherd the flock of their father or merely a flock of their father, i.e., Yaakov Avinu could have had other flocks, or he could not have had other flocks, and it wouldn't really be material. And even according to the reading, they went to shepherd the flock of their father. That doesn't actually preclude him having other flocks. So from a purely grammatical view, there is a difference. But from a semantic or narrative view, the S is not really an important word. The question is, what are these two dots, one above the aleph and one above the taf, doing in the Sefer Torah? So the first source we're going to look at is the earliest source we have that deals with the concepts of dots in general, and it's from the Mishnah in Pesachim, chapter 9. So it's also topical since we're on the road to Pesach. So the first Mishnah in Perek Tet reads, Misha hayat tameh over derech rechoka, someone who is tameh, which means to say lechora tameh mes, as we'll see, or he's far away, v'lo asa etha rishon, ya'asa etha sheni. And he didn't do the Pesach on the 14th of Nisan, as he's supposed to. He should do it the second one, i.e. on the 14th of Iyar, what we call Pesach Katan or Pesach Sheni. Shagag or Ne'anas, he was in a state of shogeg, so he didn't know it was Pesach, or he didn't know you're supposed to bring a korban Pesach, something like that. Or he was Ne'anas, he was in some way prevented, unable from being able to bring the korban Pesach. V'lo asa etha rishon, and therefore he didn't do it for those two reasons. Ya'asa etha sheni, he also should do Pesach Sheni. So if that's so, why does it say, i.e. where, in Perek Parshas Ba'alotcha of Sefer B'Midbar, why does it specifically talk about two cases when it introduces the concept of Pesach Sheni? It talks about someone who's far away, on a derech rechoka, he's on a far way, or someone who's tamei, which is what the Mishnah was talking about at the beginning. Why does it mention these two cases, when in fact there are two other cases which might in fact be just as common, or certainly can happen, where you also won't be able to do the korban Pesach, and the rule is exactly the same. You also have to do the Pesach Sheni. Why does the Torah pick out these two cases and leave aside the other two cases? It comes to tell you the following: that someone who is shogeg or ne'anas and doesn't do the korban Pesach, all that's happened is he's postponed his chiyuv, i.e. the chiyuv that he had originally on the 14th of Nisan now falls on the 14th of Iyar, and then if on the 14th of Iyar he chooses not to bring his korban Pesach for some reason, he would be chayav kareth. However, someone who was on a far away, or he was tamei mes, he gets another chance to do the korban Pesach that he couldn't do the first time around. But if he doesn't do it, his onesh kareth is now no longer applicable. Okay, that's the first Mishnah. And then the second Mishnah says, Ezohi derech rechoka. Well, what counts therefore as being far away, which is what will take away your onesh kareth. Mina mod'im, or other gears say mina mod'ith, v'lachus v'chmidatha l'chol ruach. From a place called mod'im or mod'ith, and further away, v'chmidatha l'chol ruach. So there's a place called mod'ith that is a certain distance away from Yerushalayim, which is also say basically it's how far it takes to walk in one day. And you draw you take that as a radius, and you draw a circle around Yerushalayim. And if you're within that circle, and you don't bring your korban Pesach, you've got a chiyuv kareth. If you're outside of that circle, there is no chiyuv kareth, and you're supposed to bring a korban Pesach still on Pesach Sheni, but even if you don't for some reason, there's still no chiyuv kareth. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Rabbi Eliezer says, Me iskupath ha'azara v'lachutz. No, from the threshold of the courtyard, i.e. of the Beis Hamikdash, and outside. So the outer wall of the temple compound. If you're inside, and which would be before a very strange thing to do, you just choose not to bring a korban pesach, then you've got a chiyuv kares. But if you're outside, like even if you're in Yerushalayim itself, and you don't bring a korban pesach, that counts as being far away. That your chiyuv kares is non-existent. Now, it's obvious that according to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, essentially, it's almost impossible actually to get chiyuv kares for not bringing your korban pesach. There are only two mitzvot aseh that carry with them the penalty of kares. And according to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, this one is almost a kind of a theoretical thing, because it's hard to imagine a situation where someone would actually be inside the temple courtyard itself and nevertheless not bring a korban pesach, and everyone outside can't get kares. And that, however, though, is not the halacha. Well, let's put it this way: the accepted halacha, according to Rambam, etc., is that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, even though Rashi in his Perush on the Chumash brings Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, as we'll see shortly, as explained by Rabbi Yossi, and therefore, lechora, there is an issue with people who are in Yerushalayim and even somewhat outside Yerushalayim within this circle around the Beis Hamikdash. Whenever Pesach comes, that they since we know from the Mishnah in Edioth, you can bring a korban Pesach even without there being a Beis Hamikdash. So there have been people who have suggested, poskim who've suggested that it might be a good idea whenever Pesach rolls around to not be in Yerushalayim. But as a general rule, we say, well, everyone is ne'enas because someone, unspecified exactly who, but someone is preventing Am Yisrael from bringing a korban Pesach. And therefore, what happens the first time is it gets postponed to the 14th of Iyar. And then the second time on the 14th of Iyar, well, you're also ne'enas. You also can't bring the korban Pesach because nothing's changed. And therefore, at that point, your chiyuv kares goes away. Anyway, here's the important point for our purposes. Amar Rabbi Yossi lefichach nakud al hey. Therefore, it's got a dot on top of the hey at the end of the word rechoka. Lama lo mipnei sherechoka wadai ela me'eskupas ha'azara v'lachuz. To tell you that it's not, when the Torah says derech rechoka, it doesn't really mean it. It doesn't have to be mamash rachok. In fact, it doesn't really have to be rachok at all. As long as you're outside of the Beis Hamikdash, as long as you're outside of the Azara, to be more precise, you don't have a chiyuv kares. So that is the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah is referring to the fact that one of the 10 places, in addition to the pasuk we looked at before in Al Sidra, where there is a dot, is on the word derech rechoka in the pasuk in Ba'haloscha, where it tells you about the two categories of people who have to bring a Pesach Sheni. Now, on this, the Yerushalmi says as follows. Now, as is not infrequently the case, this section in the section of Yerushalmi is not 100% crystal clear. I'm going to explain it as it seems to me most reasonable to explain it, having looked at a different Mefarshim on it. Unfortunately, Rav Buch's amazing Perush, Orlai Sharon, which is really an essential work that everyone needs to have, does not yet extend to Masechet Pesachim. So it's possible that some aspects of this, when Rav Buch does make his Perush in Yitzhak Hashem, I might retract. But in the meantime, this is what it says. Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, the Chachamim, the kind of unnamed friends, Lichora, majority opinion, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Wahaish asher hu tahor uvderech lo haya. So this is the second time in that passage of Pesach Sheni that these two concepts of A being Tameh and B being on a derech, we'll see why I didn't say derech rechoka, come in. So the first one is the one that's sort of somewhat quoted in the Mishnah we just saw, which is ish ki yichye tameh lenefesh over derech rechoka lachem or lechem, etc. And then that's it. There it says what he should do. I used to bring the Pesach on Pesach Sheni. Then after that it says wa ish asher hu tahor, and the man who is tahor uvderech haya, uvderech lo haya, and he wasn't in the way, and he didn't do the korban Pesach, he gets kareth. So Chevrai b'shem Rabbi Yochanan quote the second pasuk, and they say Yatza zeh shahaya v'derech. This comes to exclude this person, i.e., the person who is on the way. I.e., lechora, we're talking here, the Chevrai b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, are supporting the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, not through a drasha like we saw from Rabbi Yossi about the Heon Rechoka, but on the mere fact that the second time the concept of being on a derech comes up, it doesn't say the word Rechoka at all. And therefore, merely being on the way is good enough, and therefore you don't have to be far, and therefore there's no reason to draw some circle around Jerusalem and define what far is. Merely being on the way is good enough that you don't get kareth. Rabbi Za'ura b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Za'ura, also in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, but a conflicting tradition of what he said was Kashahu Masir, hu Maskir Rechoka. Kashahu Onesh, Ena Maskir Rechoka. So that's just what I said. Now, it seems to me that the simplest explanation here is that actually Rabbi Za'ura is saying the same thing as the Chevrai b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. There isn't a machlokes. He's just, it's a different wording. So, whereas Chevrai in the name of Rabbi Yochanan just quoted the second pasuk and said, therefore anyone who's on the way does not get kareth. Here Rabbi Za'ura spells it out and says, when it gives you the azhara, when it tells you if you were tamei or v'derech rechoka, you have to bring a korban pesach. It says rechoka. In the second pasuk, when it talks about the punishment of kareth, it doesn't say rechoka. Therefore, you don't have to be far away. Rabbanan amrei, but the Rabbanan, the more majority opinion than the opinion of the Chevraya we saw before, not 100% clear what's the difference in Chevraya and Rabbanan, but this seems to me the majority opinion, say as follows. And this is what's directly relevant to our topic. B'sha'a she'kathav rabba al hanakuda at doresh es ha'kathav u'masalek es ha'nakuda. Whenever the katav, i.e. the written section, is larger than the dotted section. So, there are some places, in the 10 places of the Torah, sometimes where there's dots, sometimes it's only on one letter, or more than one letter, but not the whole word, and sometimes it's on the whole word, or if not the whole word, the majority of letters in a word. So in the case of S, in the posuk we looked at the start, in our week Sidra, both letters, i.e. 100% of the letters in the word, have a dot on. In this case, in Parshat B'Ha'alothcha, only one letter, the last letter, the Hey of Rechoka, has the dot. So the Rabbanan say, whenever the written section is more than the dotted section, i.e. most of the word does not have a dot on it, at Doresh es ha'kathav, you expound the written section, u'masalek es ha'nakuda, and you get rid of the dot, i.e. what? I.e. you read the word as if the dotted letters weren't there. And whenever the dots are more than the writing, i.e. the non-dotted section, i.e. the majority or all of the word is dotted, at doresh es ha'nakuda, you expound, you explain the dots, u'masalek es ha'kathav, and you get rid of what's written. Now, it can't mean that L'chora, it can't mean that you expound the dots, because dots don't have meaning, they're just dots. And it can't mean that you get rid of the non-dotted letters and only leave the dotted letters, because that would basically in every case just leave you with nonsense. It seems to be it's phrased in this way in order so that the two cases just should have a nice kind of formal, like literary parallelism. But what it means is you read it as if the whole word wasn't there. I.e., you are doresh the nekuda. The nekuda is telling you not to read the word, and therefore masalik kasav. You get rid of what is written. Amar Rabbi Ribi, afal pi she'en shamel nekuda achas mil ma'alan doresh es nekuda u'masalik kasav. But Rabbi disagrees with this opinion. He says, even though you've only got one dot above, i.e., there's only one dot, there's only a dot on one letter. The dots do appear after or above. Or it's possible that mil malan here means at the end of the word. So he's specifically referring to our case of derech rechoka, where you have a dot on the hey at the end of the word. Even though only one letter is dotted, you explain the dot and get rid of the ksav, i.e., as I explained before, you read it as if the word wasn't there. So, what is Rabbi saying? He's saying if you have a dot, even a dot on one letter at the end of the word, you read it as if the word wasn't there. I.e., what is Rabbi Yossi saying? He's saying when it says uvaderech rechoka, what he means say, when it says ki yihya tamil nefesh or vaderech rechoka, you, according to Rabbi, you don't read the word rechoka. When you want to expound what the pasuk means, you read it as if it says ki yihya tamil nefesh or vaderech. I.e., anyone who's on any derech, that's good enough, and you don't have to be rechoka. Therefore, that's what Rabbi Yossi is saying. As long as you're on the way, you cannot be chayav kares for not having brought your korban pesach. So that would be Rabbi Aleba the Rabbi Yossi, so to speak. But then the Stam Yerushalmi says, "Hey sheberechocha nakud." The hey in the word rechoka, the very last letter is nakud, and therefore the point is you should read it as follows: Ish rachok ve'en derech rachok. I.e., what? If you read the word rachok without the hey, what's changed? Well, it used to be a feminine, used to be a adjective in a feminine, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what's the technical linguistic term. It used to be in a feminine form, i.e., therefore it must be modifying the word derech, far away. But if you read it without the hey, then it must be modifying a masculine noun. What's a masculine noun? Ish, which appears earlier in a sentence. And so therefore, we're saying that the man is far away and not the way is far away, i.e., what's going on here? Well, if we don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer, if we hold like Rabbi Akiva, what's important? Is it important that you're on some sort of long road, or is it important where you happen to be? Well, obviously the answer is what's important where you have to be, i.e., whether the derech is rechoka is really actually immaterial to the question of whether you have or haven't been exempted from the chiyuv of kares. And therefore, it makes sense to read the word rachok as if it doesn't have this rachoka, as if it doesn't have the hey, and it just says rachok, and it therefore falls on ish rather than derech. And it's telling you that if a person is far away, then he doesn't get his chiyuv kares, and he has to bring the pesach sheni. I.e., if we understand it this way in the Yerushalmi, everyone agrees that the dot tells you not to read something. Rabbi Yossi and following him Rebbe hold, the dot tells you not to read the whole word, and therefore you don't really have to be far away at all. As long as you're outside the Azara, that's good enough to not be chayav in kodesh. But the Chachamim, shall we say, the Rabbanan in the Yerushalmi, following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, holds no. What does the hay tell you? What does the dot on the hay tell you? It tells you not to read the hay, and it tells you something that in fact everyone agrees with, which is it's completely immaterial how long the road is. It just matters where the person what we're talking about is physically located. We're talking about ish rachok and not derech rachoka. So that is the Mishnah and Yerushalmi, and that is the only place. Well, there are many places all throughout the Bavli where the dots in the other 10 places are expounded for midrashic purposes. But This is basically the only really, well, there's one other one, as we'll see shortly. But this is really the only one that has any halakhic significance, because as we'll see, in all the other cases except one, they're not really dealing with, well, not really, they're not at all dealing with halakhic concepts at all. So the primary source that deals with all 10 of these places in one place is the Sifrei on Bamidbar, which is also springing off the kind of the primary example, because it's the example with the most halakhic importance, or one could almost say the only example of any halakhic importance, was the example of Derech Rechoka. Now, my view is that Sifrei postdates the Mishnah, and I think that's almost the unanimous view now among those who work on these things. Though some would say, I should have done the Sifrei first, because the Sifrei precedes the Mishnah, according to views that were once quite popular. In any case, I'm going to read from Menachem Kahana's edition of the Sifrei. When I was making a Sefaria source sheet, of course, I had to use the edition on Sefaria, and I did try to edit it as much as possible to make it fit with Menachem Kahana's edition. But I'm going to read from this just in case I made a mistake somewhere. For those who haven't already done it, I think of all the possible books you could buy, possibly the most important, with the exception, I think, of Rav Buch's Perush on Yerushalmi, is to buy Menachem Kahana's 4-volume edition and Perush on Sifrei, which is a really, truly remarkable work and shows you just what real scholarship is and what real scholarship can achieve. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say he should be considered one of the gedolim of our generation for this it's really amazing work. So, reading this section of the Sifrei. So it starts by saying, "O v'derech rechoka." Now, and then in the edition, based upon the Vatican manuscript on which it's primarily based, there are in fact dots that appear. So the dot appears here on the hay as we have it in our Sifrei Torah, as we'll see in due course. Most of, well, in fact, in all of the places in the Sifrei that it's going to cite, whenever it has dots, which is not all on every occasion, the dots in almost all cases do not perfectly match with the dots as we have them according to our tradition. Whether that's significant or not is not 100% clear. The Sifrei is certainly very old, and it is a lot older than any extant Sefer Torah we have by many hundreds of years. And it's also older than the Aleppo Codex or the Leningrad Codex, which are our primary sources for these kind of things, also by many, many hundreds of years. But the Ketav Yad Vatican is not especially old. And it may just be that the dots are placed in Ketav Yad Vatican are in error. On the source sheet, I couldn't put dots above the letters. What I did is I bolded some letters. Whenever the source sheet is bolded, that's to indicate that in the manuscript, Ketav Yad Vatican has a dot. Okay, so it starts by saying, "O v'derech rechoka, nakud al hey, she'afilu v'derech korova, v'hu tamei lo haya ose imahenes haPesach." So, what does the Sifrei start by saying? The hay, the dot on the hay, is to tell you that even if he's relatively close, he's on the derech krova and he's tamei, he doesn't do it in the Pesach. Now, the obvious question here is, why should you need a dot on the hay? Because the pasuk itself tells you. It gives two examples. It gives someone who's tamei or someone who's on a derech rechoka. And so you don't need a dot on the word rechoka to tell you even if he's close but he's tamei, because it told you if he's tamei. That's what o does, right? So different Mefarshim have struggled to explain this. Horovitz suggested that it comes to tell us, it's perhaps still the most plausible explanation, it comes to tell us about other forms of tumah, because of course it's not just being tamimith that prevents you from doing a Korban Pesach. Any form of tumah prevents you from doing a Korban Pesach. Now, in most cases, it's not such a serious issue, because most forms of tumah you can rectify, and as long as you show some kind of basic self-discipline and preparedness, you can make sure you're not tamei when it comes to bring the Korban Pesach. But of course, Zavin and Zavoth and Nidoth, and in fact Yordoth, that's not the case. They are just stuck, and there's nothing they can do about it. So you do need some kind of posuk to tell you that, or some kind of drasha to tell you that they also don't bring the Korban Pesach, the Korban, and have to do the Pesach Sheni. But other people have brought kashas on this explanation, and Menachem Kahana says Sarachi, and if Menachem Kahana says Sarachi, then probably it is Sarachi. But then the Sifrei goes on, and then it goes through all of the examples in the Torah from the beginning to the end, where it has dots. It says as follows: Kiyotze yishpot Hashem beni uvenecha. So Hashem should judge between me and between you, and you'll see that all of the words in the word venecha here are dotted, unlike in our tradition. That is where Sarah Imenu is talking to Avraham Avinu following the birth of Ishmael and Hagar not respecting her. And the Sifrei says, Shelo Amra Lo El Al Hagar Bilvad. So the words Beinecha, between me and between you, are to say that she wasn't really angry with Abraham, so to speak. She was just specifically angry with Hagar. V'yesh omrim ala matilin eva beno levena. And there are those that say, no, she was angry with others, matilin, lashon rabim, who were placing eva, discord between him and between her. Kiyotsebo vayomru elav. Again, the dots are on here on every letter. Ayei Sarah ishtacha nakudalav shehu shayu yoda in heichanu. Slicha. So the Malachim say to Avraham Avinu, where is Sarah, your wife? And the word elav is dotted in order to indicate that they knew perfectly well where Sarah in fact was. Kiyosibo velo yada b'shichva uvkuma. The word uvkuma. So here it's interesting. Is in a Sefer Torah, if you look, the only letter in uvkuma that is dotted is the vav, and here every letter is dotted except the vav because the vav doesn't appear, except the preceding conjunctive vav. So definitely something's a bit up with that. So the word uvkuma has a dot, or here dots upon it. Nakudalav, so that's talking about Lot and his daughters and the unfortunate incident. So when she lay down, he did not know, but when she got up, in fact, he did know. Even though the pasuk says he didn't know what was going on when she lay down, when she got up. Actually, when she got up, he was aware of it. Kiyotsebo, this is one that is more famous for having brought in Rashi. Wayishakehu, I think that's how you read it. When Esav and Yaakov Avinu reconcile, albeit temporarily, it says that Esav, he hugged him and he fell upon his neck and he kissed him and they cried. And it says, Shelo nashko b'chol lebo. He didn't kiss him with all his heart. It wasn't a 100% sincere kiss. That's what the dots on Waishakehu mean. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, note well here, Wahalo b'yadua she'esav sonei liYaakov, ela nehefchu rachamau ba'othasha u'nashko b'chol lebo. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says as follows: is it not known that Esav hates Yaakov, but rather at that moment his mercies were stirred up and he kissed him with all his heart? The dots come to Lichora tell you that you should read the word somewhat like non-literally. And therefore the first explanation is that it says he kissed him, and you read it, well, he didn't really kiss him so much, like he kissed him in an insincere way. But Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says the opposite. He says, no, think about it. We already know from the story that Esav hates Yaakov. That's what the whole story has been about up until now. That's why Yaakov had to flee. So if it comes along and kisses him, you might think, oh, well, he's just kind of, it's not really sincere because we know he hates him. And therefore, the dots come to tell you, no, in fact, it was sincere. Now, everybody, well, I don't want to say everybody, but it is well known that in Rashi, we find the words, instead of saying, wahalo b'yadua, it says, wahalacha b'yadua. It's halacha. And then many people quote this and they'll say, you see, Chazal teach us that it's halacha that Esav soned Yaakov. So it's halacha that Goyim hate Jews, and certain modern authorities have opined upon this at great length to say that it's just some sort of law of the universe that God created, that Jews are always going to be hated. There's always going to be anti-Semitism, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, the fact is that none of the Kitvei Yad say halacha b'yadua. All of them say halacha b'yadua. Halo b'yadua is a phrase that appears in Midrashim, not like all over the place, but like commonly enough that it makes perfect sense in this context. And halacha never appears in this alleged sense as meaning some kind of natural law of the universe or something like that. That's not a thing. Halacha has multiple meanings, or very least shades of meaning in text from Chazal, but it never means this or anything even close to that. And the fact is, this Giyus is just a mistake, and there is no source, in fact, for this idea that halacha, that anti-Semitism is halacha, that anti-Semitism is some sort of immutable law of the universe. And I mean, at the very least, from the perspective of just being accurate and stuff, people shouldn't be quoting this fake Chazal. And also, though, I don't want to go into it at great length here because it's not really pertinent, both in the Dati Leumi world and the Haredi world, I could cite numerous examples from my personal experience. It would be better if people weren't being inculcated with this attitude that the way Goyim and people surrounding you feel about you is completely independent of your actions, and therefore you can just act in whatever way you want, and you don't have to worry. And therefore, when Chazal said you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, mipnei Eva, Chazal didn't really mean it, and actually it's perfectly fine to cause Goyim to hate you, because in fact you're not causing Goyim to hate you, because Goyim will always hate you, and you're perfect and you've never done anything wrong. Okay, we continue. Kiyotsebo, our source. Vayelchu echal lir'oth es echav. It doesn't say echav, but this is our pasuk. Sorry. Vayelchu echav lir'oth es son avihem. Nakudalav. So this is one of the few cases in Sifrei where actually, at least this edition of Sifrei, where the dots perfectly match our Masorah. Shelo halchu ela lir'oth es atzman. So they didn't go to shepherd the sheep, they went to shepherd themselves, which means it's not clear exactly what it means to shepherd yourself, but it means they went for their own interests. They didn't go with kind of the right attitude of kibbud of, in order to look after the family business. They were doing it for their own purposes. Kiyotsebo, now we skip ahead because that's where the dots are located. We go all the way to Sefer B'Midbar. Kiyotsebo kol pakuri levim asher pakad Moshe wa Aharon nakudalav. So the word Aharon has dots on it. Shelo haya b'minyan. That Aaron wasn't in the count. There are two explanations of that. One, which appears in later Midrashim, is that Aaron wasn't counted. He's not in the adding up. He's not in the figures that we get to 600,000 and whatever the exact figure is we find in the Torah there. Actually, Aaron's not in that, so you should really add one more because he wasn't counted. And the other one, which Lichora is more correct, is that Aaron actually, even though it says these are the countings of the Levium that Moshe and Aaron counted, actually Aaron didn't, in fact, do the counting, even though it says he did. Kiyotzibo, then you get to Parshat Chukath, and we have one of the oddest, I think you could reasonably say, sections of the Torah, where it quotes a poem to prove that Sichon, king of the Emori, conquered this territory from Moab prior to Am Yisrael conquering it from him. And it's quoting Lichora, an Amorite poem, which therefore is not even actually in Hebrew. It's in a cognate kind of Canaanite language. And we know that the Canaanite languages were more or less mutually comprehensible. So it's a bit like, it's basically like as if there was a book in German and it quotes a brief bit of poetry in Dutch. So you can understand it, but like it's just a bit off, and that probably explains why those lines are quite hard to read in certain respects. Anyway, Kyotsebo Wanashim ad nefach nakud. Now it doesn't say where the nakud is. There's no indication at all in the Ketav Yad where it is. Lechora, it's in part of the thing that's not quoted, because otherwise we would get a dot, and we find it in our Sifrei Torah. It's on the resh of Asher, Asher ad Medva, and then the Sifrei says Sha'af milahalan hayaken, i.e., it says Asher ad Medva, that Sichon destroyed all of this territory that previously belonged to Moab up until Medva, but actually it wasn't merely up until Medva; it was also including Medva. Okay. Kiyotzibo Isaron. So it doesn't say here, but as we'll see in sources we're going to discuss, and as you can see in the Chumash, it's in Parshat Pinchas in the first day of Sukkot. Isaron nakud alav shelo haya isaron echad bilvad. So it appears on first sight to be a bit of a cryptic comment, but actually it refers to a machloketh where Rabbi Meir holds that there are actually two isaron measures, and the dot comes to tell you there actually is only one isaron measure. I.e., Lechora, Rabbi Meir kind of used the language isaron lekeves ehad to say, all right, it says isaron, therefore we can infer from that there were two measures, two isaron measures. And the dot tells you, well, no, actually that drasha doesn't work, and the Stam Sifrei rejects that drasha based on that. That's Lechora what this means, although it's a bit cryptic. This is probably the most famous example of where the dots come up, because it's just the most dots in any one place. And here we find an interesting thing: the dots appear on Lanu Ulavanenu, but not on the first letter of Ad, as according to Torah, but on the Gimel of Waniglaoth. And this is not the only place where that is found. I don't remember where, but I think maybe the Leningrad Codex, or it might be the Aleppo Codex. One of them. It says that Amar lehen, he said to them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Am Yisrael, Guluyim af ani, Amar lehen, asifem guluyim af ani odia es anisterim. You have done the revealed things, and I will do for you the hidden things. Okay. Now that is, I really just, what that relevance has to the dots on the words lanu ulevanenu ad is a very complex topic. And this is actually turning out a bit longer than I thought it would. So I'm not going to go into it. The Sifrei continues. Afkan Atama, also here in our place. The Sifrei is interested on the local posuk that it's talking about. It brings these examples to show you how in every case where there's a dot, there's something you can learn from this dot. Just like we said at the beginning, even if he's close and he's tamei, he doesn't do it in the Pesach. So what I think we can learn from that Sifrei, well, there's probably a lot of things we can learn from that Sifrei, but one thing we see is that the Sifrei takes it as a given that these dots exist in the Sefer Torah, and that they're there, and that they're a fixed enough thing that you can make exegetical inferences based on them. We now see the next source, Masechet Sofrim, looks at it from kind of the opposite perspective, so to speak. Now, Masechet Sofrim has been the discussion of a lot of debate, but probably not enough debate, because it hasn't been settled yet, about who wrote it, when, why, for whom. The first 4 chapters are basically the same. They're clearly a modified version of something called Masechet Sefer Torah, which is one of the many Masechtot Ketanoth that Lechora, although again this is not super 100% for sure, Lechora were composed in Eretz Yisrael in probably the early Gaonic period. kind of in order to deal with areas where basically the Mishnah didn't deal, and it didn't deal in an organized fashion, and they're kind of Mishnah-like, i.e., they're a list of kind of halachot written in, kind of standard rabbinic Hebrew. Masechet Sofrim, the first 4 chapters clearly are taken from there. The rest of it is there are a lot of different theories. Some people believe that it represents Davka, a Eretz Yisrael tradition. There is one important piece of evidence against that, which is that it's not found. Well, sorry, I correct myself. I believe one fragment of it has been found in the Cairo Geniza, a part of it. But if it really was like an Eretz Yisrael source, you'd expect it to be much more commonly found than that. Where it is found all the time is in the Ashkenazi Rishonim, who thought it was a very, very important work. And Rabbeinu Tam famously writes that unless you've read Masechet Sofrim, you can't really paskin halacha. Unless you've learned Masechet Sofrim, you can't really paskin halacha. Partly with a view to defending specifically Ashkenazi customs against those who would say, well, it's not in the Bavli or it contradicts something in the Bavli. It's very frequently quoted in Ashkenazi Rishonim, not infrequently quoted by Ashkenazi Rishonim. They quote things that actually don't appear in our version of Masechet Sofrim, or they quote substantially different gearses to what appears in our Masechet Sofrim. So it's quite possible that Masechet Sofrim actually, in a sense, doesn't predate Ashkenazi Jewry by all that much. As in, if it wasn't a stable text in the time of the Ashkenazi Rishonim, how much earlier really can it have been than the Ashkenazi Rishonim? So, and famously, of course, the Rambam doesn't relate to it, and that's possibly because the Rambam didn't know about it. Although the other theory is that the Rambam rejected it as an authoritative source. In any case, Masechet Sofrim, as it sounds, it's as I say, the first 4 chapters are built on Masechet Sifrei Torah. So it starts off Sefer Torah. So it starts off as a basically explanation of how you make a Sefer Torah, and then it continues with other halachot that are dafka relevant to Sofrim, hence the name, and then it continues with all sorts of different halachot and agadot, kind of quite promiscuously mixed in together. And there's some eyebrow raising stuff in there. So here at Perek Vav, so relatively early on in Masechet Sofrim, but not part of what has been of the kind of the original core that is based on Masechet Sefer Torah. It says Esa nekudot b'Torah. There are 10 dots in the Torah. Yishpot, and now I'm going to read quickly because these are exactly the same places as we've already seen. Yishpot Hashem beni uvenecha yod shebenecha nakud v'yomer elav ayo nakud. So Masechet Sofrim, unlike the Sifrei, has the dots actually where we have them. V'lo yada b'shechva v'kuma vav nakud shebekuma v'yapal al savarav v'yishakehu kulo nakud v'yelchu echad lirasef son avihem es nakud asher b'kol Moshe v'Aaron nakud v'derech rocha hey nakud v'nashim al nefech asher resh nakud. The resh is nakud. Isaron shebachag b'yontav rishon vav sheba'Isaron hasheni nakud. So in the Sifrei, it was very not clear what's supposed to be nakud, i.e., even which Isaron, but where in Isaron, etc. Here it's crystal clear. Anisros Lashem Elokeinu aniglos lanu vanenu adolam ayin sheba'ad nakud. Now that's interesting because it is true that according to our text, the ayin sheba'ad is nakud, but it's also true that in our text, so is lanu ulavanenu, which it doesn't say here. But I don't want to be super medaic on the Masechet Sofrim. What I want to point out is that this is the first, what we might call halachic source that deals with the dots from the perspective of how do you write a Sefer Torah. Now, it doesn't actually put it in a prescriptive fashion, like you have to write these dots, but the mere fact that it's in a section which deals in a kind of masechta that deals with halachas of how to prepare a kosher Sefer Torah kind of implies that it's saying it as a halachic thing. Although, if you read on, it then says there are 10 places in the Torah where he is spelt with a yud instead of being spelt with a vav. And about that, you could kind of say the same thing. Is it saying this is an interesting thing, that we receive from the Torah, or is it saying this is what you have to do? Now you might say, well, in that really is a distinction without a difference. But I think there is definitely a change between the Sifrei and the Masechet Sofrim to some extent in their approach, their attitude to the dots. One is that there are these dots, and we know about them, and we've received them, and therefore you can learn the following things. And Masechet Sofrim, I think, is more prescriptive in saying that these are the dots that you have to do, and that's probably why it specifies exactly where the dots are, because we know that there were different traditions about where to put these dots. Masechet Sofrim is saying this is where you put the dots. Now, which obviously raises the question: well, do you have to put these dots? So, on that, the Rambam says as follows. So he's talking in general about various things of Sefer Torah. One should be careful with the big letters and the small letters. Everyone knows, for example, that you've got the Hey in Parshat Hazinu that's written big, so you have to write that big, and there are other places where letters written smaller. Hanekudos, Osios hanekudos, and the dotted letters, Osios hamashunos, and the different letters, Kagon Peim halafufos, like the curled pays. Now, you may say, what's a curled pay? So if you can go online and look at this, it's actually very interesting. The oldest Sefer Torah we have was found in the University of Bologna. So if you Google University of Bologna Sefer Torah, this is what you'll find. And it's a Sephardi Sefer Torah that somehow found its way to Italy and was erroneously believed by the community there to be have been written by Ezra Sofer. Al Kopanim has all sorts of interesting features which show that it's based upon a Bavli tradition. In some ways, some limited, I shouldn't exaggerate the case, but in some limited ways is different from what is considered normative halakha today, and also what is considered to be, so to speak, the Masoretic tradition of how to write a Sefer Torah. And one of them is you get these funny pays that literally they're just like what a pace or feet looks like. Instead of kind of stopping there, it does like a kind of concentric circles kind of thing, like a swirly thing. Osios ha'akumos, and the bent letters. As the Sofrim, i.e. the scribes, preserved as a Masorah. Now, we use here betagin over minyanam, and you should be careful with the tagim and the minyanam. You should be careful with the crowns, which is more famous, on the letters, and their number. Now, what does he mean with their number? If you go ask a Sofer, where do I write crowns in the Sefer Torah? They will tell you, well, there are certain letters, Shatnez, I don't remember, that Gimel and one other one, Tet, maybe? No, I don't remember. Anyway, there are certain letters where you write the crowns, and you write them on every time they come up. He says Uva Minyanam, and again, if you look in the University of Bologna Sefer Torah, that's not the only one, but these kind of medieval Sefer Torah, you'll see sometimes the exact same letter has a crown, and sometimes the exact same letter does not have a crown. And they seem to have had a Masorah, as the Rambam says, about which letters should have crowns and which letters should not have crowns. Now, it's only those letters that have the crowns, and that even appears in the Talmud Bavli, but it's not every letter that has those crowns. Then he says, Yesh oth sheyesh aleha tag echad v'yesh oth sheyesh aleha shiva. You've got some that have one tag and one that have seven. V'chod tagin kasuras zayin hein dakin kachut ha'sa'aran. All the crowns, they look like little zayins. Then he says, all of the things I've just said, i.e. the crowns, the curly letters, the big letters, the small letters, and relevant for our purpose, the dots, all of them are miswa min ha'muvcha, i.e. that's how you make a really nice Sefer Torah. If he wasn't medakdek in these things, wasn't medakdek with the tagim, because I've called Othius Ketikunan, but he wrote all the letters like properly as letters, or Shekera Vesashitin or Hirchikan, and then he's referring Hirchikan, he's referring to other halachot. So he puts the lines too close together or too far away, or He'erichan or Kitzran, or they were too long or too short. Ho'o Walohid Bikan Oth Ba'oth. As long as he didn't have two letters sticking together, Walo Chissa, Walo Hothir, and he didn't add letters or miss letters, Walo Hifsid, Surath Oth Echas, and he didn't kind of mess up the form of one letter. Walo Shinna Bif Thuchoth Ustunoth, and he didn't he didn't. I think that means he doesn't distinguish between the normal versions of letters and the end versions of the letters. Sefer kasher. It's kosher. Now, what does that mean? Therefore, these dots are optional. Now, if you say the tagin, you say, if we look at this from the perspective of the Rambam, and we say, okay, the tagin are mitzvah min hamuvcha, and if you didn't do them, you still got to say kosher Sefer Torah. And you can say, well, what therefore are tagin fundamentally? They're decoration. And what is the big hay in Parshat Hazinu? It's decoration. But if you didn't do it for some reason, it doesn't change anything. It just means that the Sefer Torah is not quite as nice as it would otherwise be. But with the dots, are dots decoration? Lichora not. If we look in the Sifrei, the second Sofrim didn't explain what the purpose of the dots is, but Lichora, in the Sifrei, the purpose of the dots is exegetical. And so therefore, what the Rambam Lichora is saying is that you have decorations that are desirable in the Sefer Torah, but none obligatory. And you also have exegetical notes that appear in the Sefer Torah, 10 of them, which also are desirable but non-obligatory, which is, I think interesting. And then if we look at the Shulchan Aruch, we find the following: Kasav hamale haser or haser male. He wrote a word that's supposed to have a vav without a vav, or vice versa, or shekasav mila shehi keri uchativ kriyasa begon shekasav yishkaven bimkom yishalagen, or betachorim bimkom. I don't even know how you're supposed to read that. The ayin pei vav lamed yud mem. I'm not even sure if you're really allowed to say such a word because maybe it's obscene. Ukiyotze behen pasul. So you wrote a Sefer Torah. Two things pasul your Sefer Torah. One, writing a vav when it's not supposed to be a vav, writing a yud when it's not supposed to be a yud, or vice versa. Because even though it doesn't change the meaning of the word at all, it does. It's an improper, but more than improper, change to the correct wording of the Torah. And the second one is that in the places where you have a Kri and Ketiv, if you write the Kri rather than the Ketiv, you've passed your Sefer Torah. Now, why should anyone be minded to do that? It's interesting that this comes up here. The fact is that Karaim, if you ask people, you say, well, what are Karaim? What's that all about? They'll usually say they believe in Torah Shebichtav and they don't believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now that's imprecise for a number of reasons, but the actual, kind of the most ironic way it's imprecise is that actually Torah Karaim, I don't know about Karaim today, but Karaim during the time when Karaim was a big thing, actually didn't believe in Torah Shebichtav at all. I.e., there is two things. We know that there's the Torah Shebichtav, and there's also the laning tradition, the Masoretic tradition. And at least in certain respects, of course, even by us, the laning tradition takes precedence in the kind of obvious senses. That's what you actually say when you read it. But by the Karaim, one of the reasons why they're called Karaim and not Ktavim or something is that they actually held that the written tradition was completely worthless, and every time there was a difference between the Kri and Ketiv, the Kri is right and the Ketiv is wrong. Full stop. And as far as I know, two things. First of all, they weren't mapped to write on scrolls; they wrote on books. As far as I know, they wrote it with the Kri. I believe that's the case. Ask someone who's an expert in Karaite history. But that may be the reason why the Shulchan Aruch mentions it. Somehow, it's otherwise. It doesn't seem like a. I mean, it seems very obvious that if you were to do that, it would be puzzle. In any case, that's all the Shulchan Aruch says here. And he doesn't actually say anything about the dots on the letters. But the Ramah says, "V'yesh od devarim shenagu behem hasofrim kamo she'etiku ish mepi ish kamo ba'osios gedolos v'katanos v'nekudos v'mashuchos." So that's very similar to the Lashon of the Rambam, and it's not by coincidence because, in fact, the Ramah is basically copying from the Torah, and the Torah was very, very heavily dependent here on the Rambam. So he mentions again in a list of things that were etiku ish mepi ish. Rambam says sofer mesof sofer, but it probably amounts to about the same thing. And one of those things is the dots. And then the Ramah goes on again from the Torah about all sorts of different halachas and how you're supposed to arrange a Shirot Yam and stuff. And he says at the end, again, the dots are lichora, an exegetical mark, that if for some reason you just didn't put them, you forgot, or lichora, even if you didn't forget, you just didn't want to, it's an improper thing to do, and l'chachila, someone should do it. You should do it as a sofer, but if you didn't do it, it doesn't actually make any difference to the kashrut for the Sefer Torah. And the Shulchan Aruch, although he does go into this in the Bet Yosef, and he doesn't say anything in the Bet Yosef that contradicts what we just said, he didn't even think these dots, lichora, were important enough that they should be mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. So the kind of the normative halachic status of these dots is like the tagim. Now, there are Rishonim, by the way, who say that if you don't do the tagim, then you've passed your Sefer Torah, but that's not kind of accepted as normative halacha. And then the Chor and the nekudot have the same thing as a kind of analogous to decoration, because again, they're not. You can't really, in any reasonable sense, say that the nekudot are decoration. They're not decorative. And the fact is that the Sifrei clearly understands them, at least in some respect, as exegetical notes. Although we'll be more precise about that in a moment. And there's a huge midrashic tradition across all sorts of different midrashic collections following the Sifrei that certainly sees these dots as exegetical notes. Nevertheless, they're optional, which you'd have to say, therefore, what is the halachic standpoint, again, on the dots, is that they are optional exegetical notes. Now, I want to make an obvious point now, which is that if you wanted to go, if I said to you, okay, you're now like the top software in the world, and you can choose 10 places in the Sefer. You've got license now. You can choose 10 places in the Torah where you can put a little dot and make this the minhag. In order to indicate that, something that you read, you shouldn't necessarily read it in this way, you should read it another way. Like, for sure, you wouldn't pick these 10 places. I think that's just a self-evident statement. Like, like we're coming up to starting to count the Omer. So you've got Mimacharat Shabbos, right? That one's caused no end of trouble. If you ask me where I'm going to stick the dot to say kind of love dafka, I'd stick it on Shabbat, and then I'd be able to say, look, it says Shabbat, but really it means Yom Tov. And you could pick, all sorts of other issues that have given the different Mefarshim, cause to write at great length and in order to match the tradition with the apparent meaning of the text. And many of these cases of the 10 dots are really cases that we're talking about Torah Kadosha here, but you still nevertheless would say to some degree, well, so what? I think the most obvious example is how much did Sichon lay waste to all of the territory of Moab up until Medva, or did he also burn Medva? I imagine it would have had somewhat more resonance to people who knew where Medva was, on the assumption that they did, and were more closely related in time to the era, and also if there were kind of territorial disputes about these areas, which we know that they were. But even so, these are not the most obvious places that require kind of exegetical notes. And I think going through, I think most of them basically are in that kind of category. Which brings us to our final source, which is Avoth the Rabbi Natan. Now, I'm not going to read all of Avoth the Rabbi Natan for a number of reasons. First of all, because it's already an hour in. Second of all, because it's quite long. And third of all, because Avoth the Rabbi Natan actually has two versions. And I'm not super up on Avoth and Rabbi Natan scholarship. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do with the two recensions. I'm not sure what's the kind of legitimate kind of scholarly way to approach this. Are you supposed to read them both in parallel? Is one more authoritative over the other? I really don't know. I'm just going to read the very last bit of Avoth the Rabbi Natan. So it says, it quotes, Hanisteroth Lashem Elokeinu v'niglos lanu ulevanenu nakudalav. Nakudalav lanu ulevanenu while ayin sheba'ad. Now, notes that Avoth the Rabbi Natan, unlike Masechet Sofrim, Lechora, matches perfectly our tradition for where you put the dots. Lama. Why are these dots here? Now, I won't read it, but I will say that in all the previous cases, what Avoth Rabbi Natan has said up to here is similar to what the Sifrei said. Either the same thing or the same kind of thing. But here it says something completely different. Elakach amar Ezra, im yavo Eliyahu, v'yoma li. If Eliyahu, a Navi, will come, and he will say to me, Mitnei katavta kach, why did you write this? Omer ani lo kavar nekadati aleihem. I put a dot on it. You don't hold it against me that I wrote this, because I put a dot on it. V'yom omer li yafe katavta, and if he says to me, why you well done, you were correct to have written these words, avir nekuda aleihem, then I'll remove the dot from them. Now, what is Avoth Rabbi Natan saying here? It's saying that the function of a dot is a bit like the brackets you find in the Gemara. So you've got the round brackets and the square brackets. Round brackets mean, like, one of the, you know what? I'm not even going to try and remember. One of them means this isn't in the text that we're kind of using as our base text, but we think you probably should read it. And the other one is, this is in the text we're using as a base text, but we think you probably shouldn't read it. It happens to be the case, we know this, that in contemporary scribal practices of the time, dots, a little dot above a word, was used for a roughly analogous purpose, i.e. to call women to question to various degrees of severity, the reliability of a certain reading. Now, other people have done work on this. It's not in particularly recent stuff. It's not, and they've shown that in many, although not all of the cases where we have these dots, variant readings can be found. Now, if we look at Sifrei, which I don't have time to do now, but if you go back and look at the Sifrei, you will see that in most cases, and it was very, very clear, for example, with the Rechoka part, when I said they were exegetical notes, they're exegetical notes, but they're specifically saying, basically, read it as if it wasn't there. I.e., with Rechoka, either read it as if the hay wasn't there, which is the majority opinion, or read it as if the entire word wasn't there, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Or at least Rabbi Yossi is explained in the Yerushalmi. Now, this Avoth Rabbi Natan is not an old work, that's for sure. So it's not the question of whether it's preserving some kind of older tradition, which for some reason didn't find its way into earlier works, is interesting. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that the author or the compilers of Avoth Rabbi Natan would make up on their own volition. It kind of has all the evidence kind of points in the direction of that's what the actual function of these dots are. Now, we know, because we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, that there were variant editions of texts, the whole Tanakh. We also must infer that there was a specific effort to preserve and to locate and preserve the authentic tradition of what the Tanakh, the text of the Tanakh. We also know, because as we said, you have Korean Ketiv. Now, in some cases, as in the case of Yishkavene instead of the other word, Lechora, this is a kind of engaging in euphemism. And there are other cases where Korean Ketiv have a kind of specific function, but there are certainly cases where Korean Ketiv it doesn't really make any sense that these things should exist, except as a variant reading. And what it means is that one reading was preserved in the written tradition, and one reading was preserved in the laning tradition, which is interesting because it tells you that these were kind of separable traditions. And of course, it's quite possible and quite probable, if you kind of reflect a bit on what it would have entailed, that in composing the writing tradition, in discovering the authoritative writing tradition, in the same way that the Masoretic Leni tradition preserves variant readings, there would have been also variant readings within the kind of those who were entrusted to do this job. And if you look at it from that perspective, the idea that there were 10 readings in the entire Torah that kind of have this like somewhat questionable status, it's actually pretty good, especially given the basic non-significance of essentially all of them from a Peshat perspective, and almost all of them even from a kind of Drush perspective, except for what we might call Agadic reasons. Then you might say, yeah, actually that's pretty good. And if you know anything about kind of ancient texts and like variant editions of Homer and whatever, you'd actually say, this is pretty amazing. On the other hand, of course, not everyone will be satisfied with that, and I do understand that this section of Avoth the Rabbi Natan was shown to Rav Moshe Feinstein, and he declared this is a false midrash, along with certain other sources that were found, and that if you believe in these things, you're a kofer and you puzzle the wine, and etc. So I don't want to puzzle anyone's wine or make anyone else puzzle anyone else's wine. So I'll just leave by saying that is what Avoth the Rabbi Natan says, and that is the kind of the most the explanation of these dots that best fits with the evidence. Okay, and on that note, I'm going to end.